Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jason Knight, and on each episode of this podcast, I'll be having inspiring conversations with passionate product people. In the spirit of tonight's episode, I've had a good idea. Why not head to the website, onenightinproduct.com, sign up to the mailing list or subscribe on your favourite podcast app, get all your friends to do the same, and none of you have to miss another good idea ever again. That's right, on tonight's episode, we're speaking about really good ideas and how to take your hypotheses, work out your risks, ask the right questions and get buy-in for the results from a possibly sceptical leadership team. We also talk about the importance of building rapport with the audience and hear a surprising anecdote on the same which almost certainly ended up with someone getting fired. For all this and much more, please join us on One Night in Product. So, my guest tonight is the Product Doctor, also known to her friends as Julia Shalit. Julia started out just like me, working the telephones in a call centre before donning a product white coat and stethoscope in a variety of tech companies before moving into coaching and training others to be able to answer the deceptively tricky question, is my idea worth pursuing? Julia is against waste and wants to make sure everything we do counts. To support that noble aim has recently released her already award-winning new book, The Really Good Idea Test, although time will tell if she'll regret not doing that test before agreeing to do this interview. Hi, Julia. How are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you. And how are you, Mr. Knight?
I am absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much for asking. So, first things first, the Really Good Idea Test has been out for a short while now. Very excited to see it's available in WH Smith's, although obviously that's something that will go over the heads of most of the audience probably. But it's always good to, you always know you've arrived when your book arrives in WH Smith's. How's the reception been so far?
It's been pretty good, actually. I have got a couple of favourite examples, right? My first one was a conversation I had with a 7-year-old.
Okay.
Whose mother had bought the book and was working through some new business ideas. And what I like to do is to offer people an hour or so, for them to have a go at planning their really good idea test. And then they kind of throw it against my wall and we see what sticks. So I was doing that with her mother, and her daughter came in the room and said, "Do you know, I really like this book. I've started to read it. Can I have a session as well?" So of course you can. So I had a fabulous chat with her about a cookery proposition. I won't give anything away. And the thing that struck me at 7 years old was she said, "So it's like show and tell." Right? So she's in the classroom. She said, "Well, we do this all the time. We talk to other people about what we've done and we get feedback." And to her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. So I thought that was a great bit of reception, unexpected. And another one I was talking yesterday with a fantastic guy. I won't name him. And he is a very sort of senior professor in a very heavily scientific area. And I've been helping his science PhDs over the years to kind of turn their science into business and find real propositions that they could monetize and take to market and so on. And he said to me that he recently has been given an opportunity to work with some businesses and really develop some ideas. And he would not have had that opportunity had he not been in my workshop sessions, because he hadn't quite appreciated what you do to take something from this kind of idea. And in his case, I would say invention, because these are the true inventors in our world, these scientists, these very clever brains, and how you actually take that through to a value proposition that's then worth building a business around. So that was very gratifying, I must say.
No, I can imagine. I imagine it's very good to see it coming into practice and actually taking life. And I think the thing about the kids is really interesting as well, because I've heard a couple of people in the past say that we're kind of naturally good at this stuff to start with, and we have that beaten out of us by years and years of school and business and work. So you end up getting quite bad at it, which is why you then have to learn it all again. So hopefully the book will inspire a few people. But this is your first book, I believe. You've obviously been consulting and training for a while, but did it feel particularly natural to write a book? I mean, have you always been a frustrated author, or was it a real labour of love for you?
Well, I kind of spent a lot of years doing before I started helping other people. So I've a bit of a bee in my bonnet about you can't sort of coach and teach people things that you haven't really learned and done yourself. So somebody I spoke to the other day who used to work for me about maybe 18, 19 years ago, showing my age. And she said to me, I'm not surprised you've written a book because you always had a process, which is funny, really. I did start off, one of my first jobs was process re-engineering. So actually it was on the anti-waste theme. And what my job was to take the paper out of the process and save the company £1 million, right? Which was what I did. But it was all about improving efficiency. And she said that when she came into my team, I already had various processes for doing things, and actually including asking our customers what they thought of her product, which was voicemail at the time. So I would say that as I've gone through my own work, I kind of developed these tools and ways of doing things that then I would use to help my team. And then I worked on a project with UCL at University College London, and they wanted to set up a sort of innovation course. It was the explosion of mobile apps. So the app stores had just kicked off. And I was to pull together something called the Mobile Academy, and it was to bring sort of real practitioners in to share their knowledge around business design and technology. And I actually pulled this thing together, branded it, recruited teams of experts, and we had people from IBM through to students at the university attending as participants, which was great. And it was a real interesting course where it was kind of almost, in the end, run by quite a few of previous participants who turned out to be experts in their various things, and we brought them together. So because of that experience, I had to start turning what I knew into material. Because after the first one, they said, well, hang on a minute, why aren't you teaching on this? I hadn't sort of seen myself as a natural. I was more doing the branding and pulling the program together and helping people through it. And they said, no, you should be teaching. And I realized I should. So there we are. And that's how it really started. And then combined with sort of everywhere I went and every project I did, every qualitative research project I did, I ended up using the same structure to engage with my client and to go and research their idea. And eventually I created a workbook for some people I was running a workshop for. And I thought, well, this is the beginning of a book, isn't it? And that's really, it was very organic, but it also was a way of, I guess, stopping me from having to repeat myself. And they call it now, I've got a lovely model, which is flipped learning. Do you know about flipped learning?
I don't think I do.
So the model of flipped learning is you basically say, here, read my book, go and do what you can. There are templates in there, and then come back to me and we'll have a workshop on it. So everyone's had a go. I guess my big sort of passion really is I don't want to stand there and teach people how to do this. What I want them to do is have a go, and then we'll progress their real project. I don't ever try not to do workshops or anything like that without people bringing in and working on their own stuff. So I want people to fast forward in their own plans and do something really practical rather than just sit there and be talked at.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I hadn't heard it referred to by that name before, but obviously the concept is really valid and something that I try and do as well. I hate, even like for me, when I'm learning stuff, going through loads of theoretical things up front in a classroom or something. I want to read around and I want to do some research on my own and then ask questions. So it sounds like that's a natural extension of your teaching that you've progressed with. But I understand you've already won an award for the book, which is a fantastic effort. What was the award, and do you know who you were up against?
Yeah. So there were, as I understand it, there were over 500 entries.
Wow.
So Pearson, the publisher, gave me a number of sort of book award competitions that they, as an international publisher, considered to be worth going for. And I went for this particular one. It's called Axiom, and it was out of the States, out of the US. So there were a number of different categories, and the category I went for, which was a bit of a tricky decision, because if you can imagine, you're applying to, sort of entering your book for an award, and you got, which categories shall I go for? Do I go for innovation? Or, do I go for, because it's not quite startup, it's for anybody who's trying to test any idea out, even if it's in their personal life. If you think that you might be wasting your time, effort, or money, that's what to go for. But in the end, I found this category called business reference, which sounds perhaps a bit dull, but then they put a slash and they said how to. I thought, great, this is it. This is it. It's a how-to book, isn't it? And it really is. It's not theory. It's you've read it. It's very practical. So, yeah.
So do you have a trophy or anything like that? Or I think you showed me your medal last time, if I remember rightly. So is that in a frame somewhere now? Or
it's behind me.
Oh, actually, yeah, I can see it.
That's it. My book sits behind me like my conscience, right? So about always keeping customers and users at the centre of everything. And then the medal sits on top of my 7-step diagram.
There you go. So one thing we chatted about before this was that product discovery, validation, asking people the right questions, doing interviewing, all things that are in the same ballpark as your book. It's something that's becoming a lot more popular these days. There's a lot of books around it, and I'm definitely not going to name them because this is your time and I don't want to give them free publicity, but there are a bunch of books out there these days. Why should people read your book and not any of those other books?
Oh dear. So you want me to pitch? Right.
Or insult, either or, that's fine.
I guess, first of all, it is all based on sort of practical toolkits and tips that I've used and that I've helped other people to use. So this has been written by me and all the people I've ever worked with, okay? That is a whole lot of people. So it's very much kind of proven, if you like. And there's also some things in there that are sort of very unique thoughts. Now, the funny thing is that, I will argue that nothing is ever very unique. So I would say that probably a lot of people have come to the same conclusion as me. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to say that I haven't taken it from anyone else. I've taken it from myself. So I have a couple of things in there that are, as I say, quite different, but very, very quick and very much shortcuts. And I've also seen an awful lot of what doesn't work. And so throughout the book, I give not only sort of good practice and top tips, but I also give common pitfalls. And I wonder if that's an approach that is also a little unique.
Sold, I'll buy 5. But let's talk about some of the themes from the book. So the core value proposition of the Really Good Idea Test is to help you find out if your idea is worth pursuing. So top level, how does the book help you do that specifically?
There are 7 steps to go through, and as you go through each step, you complete what you've set into a template. By the end of step 5, you have a research script, okay? And by the end of step 6, you have also a very good checklist and you've practiced your research skills. And by the end of step 7, you're summarizing and analyzing your output and you're ready to make your decisions. So it very much goes along with you.
So those 7 steps, are they all mandatory or can we kind of skip some if we're a bit short of time?
I would say that even if you think you're done, you have a little read through. This is not a terribly big book, right? So a step could be just a few pages and you need to read through. Now, the point about the 7 steps is you do need to sort of start at 1 and end at 7, but there's a little circle that you do. So as you would with any kind of research, you kind of write your research objective up front, and I call that about writing hypothesis. Again, hypotheses is a very common and well understood term, but I don't think it's done necessarily terribly well. So I have guidance on how I break that down. But you write your hypothesis. What is it you're actually trying to achieve? What's your overall big goal? What problem are you solving for who? What action do you need them to take? And kind of what's the nub of your idea? And that's your hypothesis that you start with. Now, once you start working that through and you start going, okay, what are the riskiest bits of that in step 2? And what questions do I need to ask in step 3? And then who should I recruit and speak to in step 4? Once you start doing it, you start going, oh God, do you know what? I'm in risks. I do already know that. That's not a risk. I have got enough evidence of that. And you'll start to say, well, actually, no, what really is my biggest risk? Oh, is it about how people feel, think, and are going to behave? Did I even know I could test how they're going to behave as a future state? And as you start to do this, you'll find yourself circling back. I tried to create a diagram that showed that you could go backwards and forwards. So I have kind of solid lines going one way and dotted lines going back. But what I could have done, and I played around with, was doing little loops within those 7. So you might circle around 1 to 4 and keep going, but it got too complicated. But certainly it must be done chronologically, but you can still go backwards and forwards.
So that thing about loops is actually really interesting, and maybe something we'll come back to a little bit more when we start talking about waste. But there is, amongst certain types of people in certain types of organization, this fallacy, as we'll call it, because, we're on the side of good in this discussion, but there's this fallacy that some people will come up with that is like, we don't have time for any of this stuff. This stuff takes time. It's easy to get bogged down and go into those loops and maybe infinitely loop and never actually make a decision. So if someone comes up to you, you're a consultant, you're a trainer, you go into these places and you try and help people with their decision-making processes. If someone comes up to you and says that with a straight face, what's your answer to them?
My first sort of premise is, look, you're a product person or you're a founder, and your job is to be the voice of the customer, right? So in order to be the voice of the customer, you have to understand them. So let's accept that first of all. Because if you're not going to do it, who is? Then the second premise, I guess, is how do you make decisions? Are you comfortable with making decisions that don't have evidence behind them? So the term, again, I thought I made up, but I didn't. Evidence-based decision making, is quite a common thing. Let's make decisions based on evidence. Then you say, right, so you wouldn't want to waste your resources and make all these decisions based on gut when, it could be very costly to fail later down the line. Do you? So then we agree evidence-based decision making. And then we have a discussion about, right, what is enough evidence? And this is one of the things that comes up the most, one of the most discussed things in the 7 steps. And what is enough evidence? And I put a number out there. I say, okay, so there's a couple of ways of testing it. First of all, let's appreciate that we will never, ever be risk-free. Okay? So what did I say yesterday in one of my webinars? You're standing at the altar. Will you take this person to be your lawfully wedded for life, right? That's a bit of a risk, okay? But all right, we'll try our best, okay? But nothing is ever risk-free. It's pointless to think that it is. You don't know what's going to happen. And of course, you've got your whole implementation. The thing might not work, right? So we know it's not going to be risky. But at this point in time, what level of risk are you prepared to accept? Is that 70%? Let's put a number on it. Some people can deal with numbers, 70%. Some people deal with an emotional thing. So I say, look, it's like that, stone that you left unturned. It's the one where you wake up in the middle of the night and a bit of a sweat going, oh my goodness, I don't feel comfortable about that. I'm feeling really dodgy about making that decision. But it's enough to wake you up in the middle of the night, and it is emotive. So it's about that level of risk. So those sort of 3 things combined are the conversation that we have. And then, of course, just from a practical point of view, listen, spend 2 weeks doing this to avoid a hell of a lot of waste.
But do people really need to do this? What about the inspired hippo in the room or the lesser spotted product visionary leaders of the world that they're just amazing. They've seen Steve Jobs on stage. They know what this is all about. They just need to sit there and have a flash of inspiration and a eureka moment. What do you think the chances are of those people succeeding?
I always say 1 in a million. And these people exist, my goodness. And I've met a lot of people who've made some sort of lucky or good instinctive decisions without necessarily having the evidence. And I'm not going to take away from that. But can you honestly sort of look yourself in the mirror? That's another one of my techniques, and say, you really feel that you're one of those people.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to, it's possible to win poker with any hand, right? Effectively. But at the same time, if you go all in all the time, then you're going to lose all of your money pretty quickly. So it's a very much uneven equation. But one of the things you talk about, obviously, is creating a good hypothesis, something to be tested, and some of the steps that you can use to do that. And on the subject of waste, as obviously we've been talking about before, not wasting that time, a lot of people, when they try to create a hypothesis, or when they do create a hypothesis, they kind of create something that they already think they know the answer to. And then all of their efforts are then turned towards proving that as quickly as possible. So what are some ways that you, as someone trying to come up with a good hypothesis, can actually ensure that is actually a good hypothesis that can be tested and that you'll learn from, versus just trying to reinforce the biases that you already have.
Throughout each of my 7 steps, I offer up ways to sort of remove that bias. And they do exist at every step. So the obvious place, for example, is how you ask a particular question, right? So how to stay neutral and how to actually almost kid yourself that you're not invested in the thing that you're seeking the answers to, right? So I have a few techniques right the way through. Another way of doing it, another technique I have, is to measure and score the answers that you get. So before you actually go and ask the questions, you work out what your measures of kind of good look like. And it becomes a sort of objective exercise. I remember when I was young, and it always makes me laugh, that there was a particular person's house I never wanted to go to. Nothing sinister, but I just didn't like them. I didn't want to go. So every time I was due to go, I kind of went into my parents and I said, look, I got the most terrible stomach ache. I really can't possibly go. And I played it so well. I actually gave myself a stomach ache, right? I convinced myself. And it's when you go into your interview, there's something I do in the opening of the interview that basically states your neutrality. And there are ways of doing it. So, for example, you might say, so what we're going to do in this interview, I'm going to ask you a bit about this thing that I've recruited you on, whatever it is. So I'm going to ask you a bit about it. And we're going to talk around some of the things you do to kind of perhaps address it today and how those things work for you. And then I'm going to show you an idea. Okay. But when I show it to you, I want you to know that I've got a lot of ideas. This is one of many ideas. If you don't like this idea, that is great, because honestly, I've got loads more to get on with. So really, this is about you being as honest with me as you possibly can. And what's more, I did say I really appreciate your time on this. And I did say I'd give you a £40 voucher for helping me on this and for your time. But I give you this voucher now as a thank you for your honesty.
Yeah, that's obviously a really interesting framing. And I know that there are other, again, unnamed books which talk about some of the ways that people will try to please you in their responses as well. So trying to frame it in such a way that people think you don't care as such, or not that you don't care, but that you're not going to be offended. I think that sounds like a really good technique. But some people can be really bad at asking questions. Like, obviously, you've got lots in the book about writing good questions and working out what to answer, but some people are just naturally not very good at asking questions. How do you make sure that you're asking the right questions and that you're not just reinforcing the biases that you went in with? You framed it like you just said. They shouldn't be afraid to give you an answer, but you still have to ask the right questions.
Yeah. So I'm going to level with you now, Mr. Knight, and I'm going to tell you that not everybody should go and do their own research. So there are some people who should never do this, right? I would love to have a chance at helping everybody to do this, right? But just like the percentage of risk, right? There are always going to be a percentage of people who can't do it. And you can imagine what sorts of roles they actually fulfill or where their backgrounds have been. But I can also tell you that anybody who is a good product person or a good marketing person is probably a good people person, right? And that's where this really sort of comes from, right? So I do think that product/product marketing people should, by their character, be able to do this.
That's interesting, actually. I remember quite some time ago now having a good discussion actually for this podcast with an autistic product manager product leader actually. And obviously that in itself threw up a lot of questions because, of course, not everyone is comfortable dealing with some of the traits of an autistic person, some of the ways that they'll conduct themselves and comport themselves in an interview. And actually what he said is that in certain situations, he'll go in with the UX person and let the UX person lead so that he's still there getting the input and understanding what's going on and getting it from the horse's mouth. But at the same time that, let's call it what it is, the interviewee is more comfortable dealing with someone that acts more like they expect. So I think what that really boils down to, and what you've touched on, is really that you have to put the right chess pieces in the right place at the right time.
So I also have in the book, and I love that example you've just given, it's perfect. In the book, I have an exercise called the Interviewer's Workout. And I ask people to do a couple of things. The first thing I ask them to do is to practice their full research script with someone. It doesn't have to be a target customer. It just has to be someone. And in this case, I don't even mind if it's someone very close to them. It doesn't really bother me. But practice it. You're not just checking the flow of the questions, but you're checking how you've worded the questions, and you're also checking how you ask the questions, right? And there are particular suggestions I make as to how to get feedback from that person and to see how kind of good you are. The other thing I always recommend is that every interview, including your practice runs, and I think you should have 3 practice runs incidentally, should always be recorded, audio recorded. And it's another potential bone of contention that I'm really happy to discuss and take anyone on with that. Recording interviews are primarily so that you can actually listen and interact with the person that you're talking with, right? Primarily. And listen for all the clues that you might miss and all those weird interruptions to the flow if you're writing stuff down. But also an opportunity for you to listen back to yourself. And I can tell you, yeah, I listen back to interviews that I've recorded because I'm obviously taking notes and analysing the results I've got. And I hear it in myself after, a good 15, 20 years of doing research interviews. There'll be occasions where I think, God, I really led that. That wasn't right. Or I showed joy at that response. That was completely wrong, right? So you've got to sort of develop yourself and you've got to keep going with it.
Yeah, and you don't have to tell me about the benefits of rehearsing because, frankly, for this podcast and for all of the interviews that I've done, I've written stuff out and rehearsed it 2 or 3 times. When I do webinars, I do the same. I never used to do that. And actually, it is so transformative. Are there any examples from your career? I mean, you've been consulting and training and teaching, as we say. Any examples from your career, maybe earlier on before you got really good at this stuff, where you went ahead with a really bad idea? And what happened?
So I suppose you'll never know it's a bad idea if you never got to launch it, I suppose. I had what I thought was a great idea. I invented Snapchat.
Excellent. How many years before Snapchat was that?
About 2. So this was a great, not great experience in a corporate where one of the products that I managed was picture messaging. I worked for a mobile operator, as you said. And we were asked to sort of go innovate, literally. We're going to have an away day. You've got 2 weeks, come up with some ideas. And that was it, right? So I did my user research around picture messaging. I went and spoke to a lot of people. I observed. I did all the good things. And I realized that a lot of pictures were taken but not sent. And I also realized that people started smirking, not smoking, but smirking when they spoke about it. And they were all the sorts of messages, pictures that you wouldn't want to be sent around, right? You get my drift. So the obvious thing, sex sales was going to be to make a sort of self-combusting MMS, right? So you'd send it, someone receive it, and it would disappear. That was received with a not on strategy response. And that was just the most painful thing. So one of the things I do when I work with decision makers in businesses is to say, look, you've got to create the right environment to get your product people and people on the ground to be able to innovate. And you've got to set strategies as well as culture and behaviors that actually they can pin things to. Don't tell people to go and do it. The other thing I went to the same away day with was the idea that your mobile phone would become your remote control. So you would actually use it to make all sorts of things happen, right, to control your surroundings. And I'm talking about probably gosh, was it, late 90s maybe? So really quite early on. So that was another interesting concept. Again, sort of no appetite for that. I'm sure I've made mistakes. The funniest mistake was made when I took over picture messaging, actually, because somebody had decided, my predecessor, to run a campaign. And the campaign was to the customer base to say, right, you've got one of these cameras, you can take pictures on your phone now, you've got a camera phone. So why don't you take pictures and send them to us? And every week we'll pull the best picture, out of the hat, and we'll give you a prize. I don't think I could even tell you on this podcast while we're recording the sorts of things that got sent in. I don't think I could. But that campaign was pulled very quickly.
That's interesting, though, the idea, of course, that you came up with what was probably a very good idea, maybe not at the time, maybe the timing wasn't quite right, but obviously not on strategy, like you said. So you've actually then been overridden by that hippo, effectively, right? So some senior stakeholder has said, okay, well, I've looked at your research, or I've looked at your logic and your reasoning, you've tested your hypothesis, you said it was all good, but actually I'm just going to say no anyway, which is obviously a challenge and almost the opposite end of the timeline from someone just wanting to make it all up themselves at the beginning. I mean, is it possible to fight against that with anything, data or otherwise? Or do you think that in some cases, if we think of, say, the innovator's dilemma and people getting caught with their pants down, not being able to basically, Kodak versus digital cameras or Netflix versus Blockbuster, like, is it always going to be that whatever or however good your research and however good your following of your 7 steps is, that there's always that chance that it's going to get torpedoed by some hippo that just doesn't get it?
Yeah, and this is why right up front in the first step, as you write your hypothesis, you're steered by me to write your goal, right? So what does good look like? What does success look like? And that links to strategy. And if you're not sure about strategy, go and ask the people, walk into their office, call them up, email them, ask them before you do it. Don't waste your time. And that is my big thing, isn't it? Anti-waste, only because I've been there and suffered from the consequences of it. And I've always been a person who is not afraid to go and confront and speak. And it doesn't have to be in a combative way. You can walk in very nicely. I've got this idea, I'm going to work on it. But before I do, can I just check that it's on strategy? Because if it's not, what's the point?
Yeah, that's obviously fair enough. But there's also the potential situation where you start off down one path that maybe is on strategy and you find some adjacent opportunity, which is maybe much more promising. Like you say, maybe you're doing something with some element of pictures on a phone and then you decide that actually self-destructing MMSs are the future and get told that is. So I guess, again, it's all about just trying to show your work, and ultimately if you're going to get overridden by the people higher up the chain, then it's their company, right?
Right, but if we are talking about this early idea stage, we're talking about very quickly going out and getting evidence to test your idea. It's a very quick thing. It's a very low investment. Someone asked me the other day, how much does it cost to go and do that? Well, actually, in the most cases, I believe in incentives, right? Incentivizing people to talk to you, but framing it in the way that I explained and setting out neutrality and so on. So, we're all really good at video now. So I'm very up for video interviewing customers and users and doing it that way. That's very low cost, and if you skip through this and really follow the tips and use the templates, you can have this done in a couple of weeks, right? We're not talking about a huge investment here. And the decision makers in the organization need to understand that if you're going to search for maybe adjacent or transformational changes, you're going to have to allow people a little bit of budget and a little bit of time to do that, right? So, yeah.
Hear. You said before this call that in your telesales career, you learned something interesting from the top seller at your company, but you wouldn't tell me what it was, and you said that I might get the chance to ask you on tape. And the main thing I learned working on the phones, which is, as I say, how I started out as well, was I didn't want to work on phones anymore. But what was the lesson you learned from that top seller?
Okay, so it was hardly the beginning of my career, that's what I'll say. So let me frame that. This was a temping job whilst home from summer university. I would never sit still, always wanted to do stuff. And I was going down to Mornington Crescent and sitting in an office and being paid nothing to do some telesales, right? And I was to, believe it or not, my job was to get an autocar and motor magazine and to find people who'd advertise their vehicle for sale and to call them up and try and sell them, right, to advertise elsewhere. Right? It didn't last more than a week, by the way. But the guy that was the most intriguing in the office, he was unbelievable. So he was kind of like a hippie-looking guy, right? And he just wore his socks in the office, you know. He was cool, older guy. And he would adopt the accent of the person that he was speaking to on the phone, right? And he got the most sales in the office. So I was hearing the most fantastic Indian accents, for example, had accents from all over the world, and they changed according to who he spoke to. And it was unbelievable. And I realized this kind of idea of trying to make the person that you're talking to feel so comfortable and feel something in common with you, right? So, you know, when you're interviewing somebody and you're getting them comfortable in talking to you, you know, it's very interesting to be able to find something similar. So if you can say to them, and not make it up, but if you can find some kind of common ground, gosh, yeah, I relate to that problem as well, you know, or whatever it is, you know, you endear yourself and they will feel more comfortable and more happy to sort of trade information with you. So I thought that was an interesting lesson, and that's not in my book.
There you go. Bonus value-added content. It's interesting, though, because I know what you mean, and I think that making people feel comfortable and almost, in some cases, trying to go for a kind of conspiratorial mood as well. Like they think they're telling you something, you know, they think you're on the same side, right? Which is a way to bond. I guess the problem I would have with trying to put on other people's accents is they might think I'm taking the mickey out of them. Yeah. And I don't think I'd be comfortable with that. But the fundamental point is definitely a good one. So where can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more, maybe find out a bit more about your book or just your work in general?
Well, I have a website, productdoctor.co.uk. I am always up for conversations. So if anyone wants to get in touch, particularly if anyone has gone and bought the book, it's on all the major book retailers, as you would hope. But if anyone does want to get in touch, I would love to hear from anyone who has the book. And I'm more than happy to give you some complimentary sessions as well. I have a couple of complimentary sessions available each month for people who've got the book and have really had a go. That's what I want, is people who've had a try. And you can also find the templates on my website. And they're in a sort of editable PDF format. So you can start filling them in, download your own set. And I would say LinkedIn as well. I've realized that, you know, it's very difficult and time consuming to try and start communities and keep everything going. Actually, LinkedIn is really the place where I kind of live online.
I will link that all in and hopefully you'll get a crowd of people rushing in your direction. That's been a fantastic chat. So obviously really appreciate you taking the time and helping to unpick some of the mysteries of finding out if things are really good ideas. Hopefully we can stay in touch. But as for now, yeah, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. I hope it turned out to be a good idea. If you want more of this kind of thing, I've got interviews with thought leaders, practitioners and much more on the website onenightinproduct.com. So please take a look around, sign up or subscribe and share with your friends so they can join in on the fun too. I'll be back soon with another inspiring guest, but as for now, thanks and good night.